Okay. So this month, for those who weren't with us for the whole couple of weeks, I just want to really just briefly set the stage. We're talking about freedom. Freedom. Right? 4th of July, freedom. And what we said is that life itself has been evolving and moving itself forward at every opportunity to demonstrate freedom. That seems to be its purpose. As we see life evolve from the mineral to the vegetable, to the animal, to the human, at each level, at each step function, if you want to call it that, what we find is that two things happen. One is there's a greater amount of movement, the ability to move, to be free to move. And the second is that there's a greater development of thinking, if you will, of the intellect. Until we get to the point where we reach the human being who is capable of free will. This is one of the things, what does it makes us human? Well, human beings have free will. We can decide. We can choose. So the pinnacle, if you will, of creation as we know it today, and we know that that's going to change, it's going to grow, is that we had reached a creation, if you will, or an expression of the divine that was capable of deciding and choosing and moving and is free. But what we said is it didn't stop there. See, it didn't stop there because there's a fifth level, where as Thomas Troward would say, the fifth kingdom of evolution. And the fifth kingdom of evolution is the spiritual being. Not the human being, but the spiritual being. For those who may have studied the Kabbalah, mystical Judaism, in the Kabbalah they talk about the animal, the vegetable, the mineral, and the speaker. They passed right over to human, the speaker. And if you think about it, the human is not entirely different than the animal. We can function at the animal level. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we function at the animal level of surviving. But it is when we come into our own that we start to, as the prodigal son says, the prodigal son went to the far land and came to his own. When we come unto our own, when we start to recognize who and what we are because of who and what God is, then we reach that level that the Kabbalah calls the speaker. We're capable of choosing and deciding, and we're capable of demonstrating a different level of freedom. As the opening reading said, that we find as we grow, there are laws that work, and they seem to limit us. We talked about gravity being one of those last week. Right? If you want to go straight up in the air, you're going to have a tough time of that, because that's not the way gravity works. But if you understand how gravity works, you understand that there are other laws that can cooperate with gravity, and you can go straight up in the air. Rocket ships go straight up in the air because of laws of thrust. Airplanes go up in the air because of laws of lift. Gravity doesn't stop working. Gravity continues to work. But we have a different understanding of it. We can cooperate with it because now we understand how it works. So life has been set up so that it would evolve to this place where we, as spiritual beings, would come into our own, would awaken to the fact of who and what we are, and we would start to exercise our dominion, if you will. Remember in the Old Testament it says God gave Adam and Eve dominion over everything. We have dominion over our thoughts. We can choose what we will think. We can choose what we will believe. We don't always know that. We don't always act that way. That's why I got a chuckle, same as everybody else, who says we're afraid when we think we have to think. Until you sit down and meditate, and then you think, oh my God, I'm never going to stop thinking. It's just, there's somebody in my head, and they won't shut up. That's what I tell the people I work with. You only hear the things that blurt out every once in a while. I have to listen to the whole stream of consciousness, and sometimes it annoys the crap out of me, So what we started off by realizing then is that when Spirit creates by declaring its intention, by saying, let it be. Spirit says, let there be, and there is. Something acts upon that. Something takes that intention of the divine and makes it so. I joke sometimes about Star Trek. Jean-Luc Picard just said, make it so, number one. It's like number one is that law of mind. Number one is that which takes the command, make it so, and does whatever needs to be done to make it so. Okay. Now, in traditional theology, you have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Father is the one that says, decides, makes it so. The Holy Spirit, the doer of the works. The Son is the manifestation, the visible outpicturing of that which Spirit declared to make it so. not a whole lot different. Things are said in just slightly different ways. So there's this power in the universe then that is part of that which we call God, that which we call the divine, that created us out of itself in its image and likeness. And because there is this part of itself that responds to thought, it responds to our thought. It responds to us exactly according to our belief. Pray, believing in your heart that it is done, it shall be done. Why? Because there's this power of the universe, this law, the Holy Spirit, if you want to call it that, the doer, that takes what we believe, and where does it say that? I believe that my outer experience directly reflects my inner beliefs. This is the law that we're talking about. I just want to make sure that everybody's clear about the law. Now, if I had one desire for today, when I sit down in the morning and I sit and I listen and I say, okay, Spirit, what is it that we want to do today? What is it that needs to be said? What is it that needs to be heard? And I let that come to me. I let that be the kernel and take it from there. And pretty much I listen to the rest of it. Let it put itself in place. But that one idea, the one thing that came today would be this. The hope would be that each and every one of us hearing this today, we're hearing this whenever we listen to it, would be very, very clear of the idea that there is this power in the universe that we refer to as the law of mind, that we are completely free under that law of mind, but we must understand it. Without fear, without doubt, without superstition, we must understand how it works in order for us to work with it. Because you know what happens when you try to work with something when you don't know how it works, right? You leave a big mess for somebody else to come clean up. You know, I didn't understand. I didn't know. I didn't know that. You know, I didn't know that it wouldn't do that. You know. And I know Ron's an electrician. If you ever work with electricity, usually you find out when you see sparks. Didn't work like that. I didn't know. It didn't work like that. So we need to understand how things work calmly, without fear, without doubt, without superstition. Because too much of what we've learned as we've grown up has been kind of tainted, if you will, with things that are not true. Paul and Marcy gave Lori and I a book to read, and I actually had a copy of it in my library, and I'm going to bring in my copy and put it in the lending library. It's called Virus of the Mind by Richard Brodian. And he talks about ideas as if they were genes, and I love the analogy. You know, we can all understand genetically that the genes that helped the human race to survive continue on, right? And the genes that cause us to do dumb things, they eliminate themselves. You ever see on the internet the Darwin Awards, where they talk about the dumb things that people... Most of that stuff's made up, by the way. You know, they have the one. My favorite is the guy who strapped the rocket engine on the back of the El Dorado and launched himself into the side of a mountain in New Mexico, right? And then they go to New Mexico and they ask the highway patrol, and they say, "Yeah, nothing like that ever happened here." But at any rate, you know, we all get a chuckle out of it. The Darwin Awards. These are the people who did the human race the decency of getting their genes out of the gene pool. Right? Is what the idea is. So I jokingly say, if anybody had a gene that thought it was good to go pet the saber-toothed tiger, that family's not with us anymore. Okay? They're gone. They've left us. So we can understand how genetically the genes that help us to move the race forward stay with us, and the genes that help us not to move the race forward eliminate themselves. But the other thing that you want to consider is that there's some genes that just came along for the ride. Okay? They're not necessarily good for us. They may even be bad for us, but they're still here. They're still here. They're still with us. And they're with us because they were attached to things that survive. Now, you want to take this forward with ideas, and this is what Brody does in the book. There are some ideas that helped the human race to survive, and there are some ideas that didn't. And there are some ideas that we still hold on to that just simply ain't true. But we hold on to them because they came to us attached with ideas that survive. And what we have to do if we are going to be religious scientists, if you will, if we're going to look at what we think scientifically, if we're going to be willing to analyze what we think and say, well, how do I know that? we have to take these things apart. Our daughter put a little post on Facebook. She's doing some coursework at college, and she had to write a paper on philosophy, and she needed 5 people to send to her what they thought philosophy is. And she was going to take those ideas and say, well, this is what people think. And from there, And as I was responding to her, I said, well, pragmatism deals with what is. It is. There's a chair here. It is. It's just very pragmatic. There's a chair. If you want to sit down, you sit in a chair. Right? Science might deal with the how of it. Well, how was a chair made? How did we bend the aluminum or the metal to fit? How did we take the ore out of the ground and mold it? So it kind of deals in the hows. But philosophy starts looking at why. Why is there a chair here? Okay. So philosophy deals in a deeper. Well, religion deals in deeper questions too, doesn't it? Why are we here? Where are we going? But the difference that I realized when I was responding to her is that in philosophy there is a dedication, if you will, to the process of discovery. The philosophical debate is always a welcome and good debate in true philosophy, as long as the debate adheres to the principles of the debate. It uses logic and reason, the Socratic method. And the idea is that if you adhere to the principles of the debate, the truth will make itself known. It must, because the process was followed. Okay. Religion, on the other hand, starts with a preconceived notion, usually, that my way is the right way, and other ways are not the right ways, and then tries to force the debate to come to this conclusion. And that's the primary difference, if you will, between, or as I see it, between religion and philosophy as practice. Now, what we try to do is we try to go in and say, we'll be open to the debate. How do I know what I know? How do I know what I know is true? Why do I believe it? And if it's not true, am I willing to let it go? Am I willing to let go of my fear, my doubt, my superstition, and those ideas that kind of came along for the ride with all the other things that survived, but the ideas are not true? And this is most important if we are to grow spiritually. And that's why I want to approach this very, very calmly, very, very matter-of-factly. I want you to think about this. Gravity. There is a law in the universe that we recognize by the name of gravity. But we're not superstitious about it, are we? We don't get up in the morning and light candles to the saint of gravity to protect us against the law of gravity during the day or anything like that. Or we don't. And I know I'm being facetious because I used to do things like this. I can't remember the saint of gravity. I remember St. Anthony was the saint of things lost, but I can't remember if there was really a gravity saint or not. Right? But there are things that we do in our spiritual practice that we would never think of doing at all when it comes to gravity. We know that gravity is an impartial power of the universe that responds to us according to our mass. That's it. That's all there is to it. Now, you can go further than that. You can go to quantum physics and say, yeah, but we really don't even understand what it is. But nevertheless, pragmatically, it responds to us according to our mass. If we could approach our understanding of the divine and our relationship with the divine just that calmly, just that clearly, to say that there is something in the universe that has created us out of itself. There's a power in the universe that we refer to as a law because it's so darn consistent, and it responds to us directly according to our inner beliefs. If we could do that, we would make leaps and bounds in our spiritual growth. But what has happened is, this is very interesting, as one culture comes into contact with another culture. Right? Remember, there was a time when the world was so big you could kind of live in your own little bubble and not be bothered with anybody else. And then we started to reach out and come into contact with one another, so we built walls. We built walls around our little bubble to protect ourselves from those people over there because, after all, we don't know who they are or where they came from. And then eventually we built armies to go knock the walls down and take all the good stuff the other people had. And in the process of doing this, what happens is the different cultures got bashed together. And it's interesting to see how even though one culture, quote, conquered another culture, the ideas of that other culture still persisted. They still carried on. Okay? Now, going back to the biblical times, going back to Moses, you remember Moses went up the mountain, And he came back down and he was all upset because the people had built the golden calf. Well, what was that all about? Well, they were going into a territory of a people who worshipped the golden calf. And he was telling his people, we're not like that. See? We don't believe in a power in a golden calf. We believe in the I am, you see. We're different than that. We don't have all these strange gods. We have one God. This is what this whole lesson was about for the people. But yet, he went away for a couple days up the mountain. And he came back down, and the people went back to worshiping the golden calf. So as one culture goes over and takes over another culture, some of the old superstitions linger on, and they take on new costumes, if you will. A good example of this is Christmas. Before Christianity, there was a holiday around the solstice in many, many different cultures, right? And in the Roman times, it was called Saturnalia, and it was a really big party. That's what it was. And when we show the history of Christmas, again, next year we have it on tape, you'll see that people were kind of hunkered down for the winter, and they had harvested all the crops, and they had killed the animals that they couldn't afford to feed through the winter, and they had all this food, and they had all this drink, and they had to stay indoors, so they just partied. Huh? Not unlike us, so to speak. You know? So there was this big celebration at this time of year. On the other hand, there was a celebration about the solstice. The light. The light was coming into the world, and people were happy about that, and they needed to celebrate. And then Christianity came along and became the more and more dominant religion, if you will, of the Roman Empire. And they said, well, what are we going to do about this, you know? What we'll do is we'll take this holiday, and we will make it the day that we celebrate the birth of Jesus. We'll make it Christmas, see? And Jesus is the light who came into the world. You can see the marketing guys all sitting in a conference room, right? And every once in a while they brought pizza in there, and they had all these little flip charts against the walls, and they were making these things, and they said, here's how we're going to frame this whole thing, you see? Jesus is the light that came into the world, and we'll do it at the solstice. Perfect. Yes, I love it. And they went out, and they started the greeting card company, and, well, I digress, okay? But the problem is that even though they moved Christmas, they made the birth of Jesus around the solstice, the old ideas, the old superstitions, if you will, the old way of thinking about the solstice continued on. And they're still there, and they're still in our traditions. When you look at the history of Christmas, most of the things that we do around Christmas time have nothing to do with Christianity. Christmas trees have nothing to do with Christianity. Okay? Probably the only thing about the Christmas tree that has to do with Christianity is those little red globes that we put on our Christmas tree. You know what they are? Apples from the Garden of Eden. That's the only thing kind of religious about the Christmas tree. So what happens is one culture takes over another culture, and these ideas are still there, these superstitions are still there, and we think we have made leaps in our understanding. We think that we have grown spiritually. Well, we're not like those people over there because we celebrate Christmas, not the solstice. But do we really? Do we really? Or are we just celebrating things in a different way? History Channel has a documentary called Hitler and the Occult. And if you ever get a chance to see it, I recommend it. And what Hitler did when they took over is they took all of the holidays that people had and they reframed them. And they celebrated them in a different way with Nazi ideology. Now, there was something within the people that strongly desired the experience of the celebration on that day, just as there is at the solstice, you see. And what they did was they capitalized on that. And they brought these holidays over, but they gave them Nazi themes. But what happens is people still have the old way of thinking attached. They're never successful in completely changing things over. Last point to demonstrate this. Emmett Fox talks about when the Europeans went out and sent their missionaries out to save the primitive religions. We probably call them enlightened now, but they call them the primitive people who needed to be saved. These missionaries went to this area, and they took the young people and they put them into their curriculum, and they got these young people to the point where they're about to be confirmed. Now, if you've ever grown up in an environment where you go through the process of confirmation, it's a big deal. It is a big deal. So what happened is the missionary sent off for the bishop to come, because the bishop was the only one who had the authority to do the confirmation. And I remember as a kid being told the bishop's going to come. The bishop's going to come. And I thought, the bishop was going to come with a big stick and just whack us or something. I don't know. Everybody was afraid the bishop was going to. And the bishop would come into your catechism class, and the bishop would ask you questions to see if you had been properly educated. Because the bishop wasn't going to confirm just anybody. So we drilled for months and months and months, and we could answer any question that anybody could possibly think of by opening up the catechism. We knew how to answer that question. Right? And then you're told when you go up there, you get in this big ceremony, this ritual, and you go up, and you have to go up in your little confirmation suit. You go up, and the bishop's going to ask you a question, one last question, while you're up there in front of mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and the entire community. And if you blow this question, you're going to be walking back with your head down because you ain't been confirmed. So it was a big deal. And all the students were prepared for it. And as they were in this little community, and the bishop came to this little community, and the children came up with their bright smiles on their face and their little confirmation outfits, and they answered their questions properly, and the bishop confirmed them. And that night he tried to go to sleep, and he couldn't sleep because there was a tremendous ruckus going on outside. There was a bonfire. There was a smell of meat cooking. There were people dancing in native costumes. And he couldn't sleep. And finally he got to sleep. The next morning he got up and he asked the missionary that was there, he says, "What was that all about?" He says, they were sacrificing doves to their God to celebrate the great white God who came from England to confirm them. Okay? All right? They passed the test, but there was something still carried over from their old way of thinking. Not to say that their old way of thinking was bad. I'm just demonstrating that even though they had been through all that training, they still had a different way of understanding. So we, as we come into our spiritual awakening, as we come into our understanding, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that I believe that may be carried over from the past that is holding me back, okay, that is limiting me? And I want to give you this example again. We're going to go back to gravity. I love watching the children. Laura said she was at the beach last week, and I was there last weekend with the grandchildren. And I love watching the little ones at the beach. I love the little ones that are just learning how to walk, and somebody grabs their hand and takes them down, they put their little foot in the water, and then they realize what it is. Sometimes they back out. Sometimes they splash a little bit. Sometimes they get kind of like this little funny goose step thing and go around the water splashing everybody. Or they'll get down on the beach with the bucket and the pail, and they'll just start doing something, And you know that there's not a whole lot of intellectual process going on at this point. They're still growing. They're still learning. There's something going on, but it's not necessarily like the movie Look Who's Talking, where there's some kind of a stream of consciousness going on there. So you look at the little ones as they learn how to walk. They get up, they take a few steps, and they plop down. And they get up, and they take a few steps, and they plop down. And they get up, and they take a few more steps, and they plop down. And after a little while, they're walking. It was a learning process for them, right? What was happening is there was a power in the universe called the law of gravity that was interacting with their mass. And when they got a little bit off balance, they fell down. And that's all that happened. That's all that happened. Okay? Nothing more, nothing less. That's all that happened. Now, if that were you and I as an adult trying to learn how to walk, what would we be doing? We would say, why did that happen? Who did that to me? Somebody pushed me. Somebody knocked me down. What is this all about? Oh. I came in and was on a ladder in the back there yesterday, and it just reminded me. I've worked for maybe 30 years on ladders in the telephone business. And every once in a while you would get on a ladder, and the thing that you needed to reach was about 6 or 8 inches further away than it was safe to reach. And I come all the way down the ladder and move the ladder. I will just stretch. And of course, and these ladders are on wheels, by the way. They're on a track and on wheels. So you'd lean out and stretch, and once you stretched to where you could just almost make it, the wheels of the ladder would start rolling, and it would go out from underneath you at about 2,000 miles an hour. And you had that moment in time where you were just suspended in space. thinking to yourself, oh, it's bound to hurt, before gravity fully takes hold and you come slamming down onto the concrete floor. Now, what happened? Gravity did what gravity does. Without bias, without judgment, without condemnation, without criticism, gravity was just being gravity. And once I had moved my body into a position where it was unbalanced, gravity being gravity brought me to the floor. As an adult, I can look at that and I can say, you know what? The law of gravity is a great teacher. It is a great schoolmaster. The law of gravity knows exactly what I need to learn. And the law of gravity has arranged the situation so that it would knock me off of that ladder so that I could fall to the floor and I could learn what I needed to learn. Oh, thank God for the law of gravity, which is so smart that it knows how to send me my lessons. Okay? It's as silly as a child saying, well, I fell down. The law of gravity must be trying to teach me something that I need to learn. The law of gravity has figured out how to make me plop to the floor so that I'll sit here until I get it. And then I'll get back up and I will walk. Okay? This idea that spirit is trying to teach you something, or the law is your schoolmaster, is old superstition that is brought over from a long, long time ago. As one culture absorbed another, it absorbed the ideas. And if you look a long, long time ago, if you look in the ancient writings of the Western world, God did that. Right? God punished us. God taught us lessons. Occasionally we got rewarded. What that was nothing more than people recognized that something was happening and they were trying to understand it. That's all that was. It's just as if we fell off the ladder and we're trying to understand it. We came to the conclusion, I'm being taught a lesson. That's all it is. That's all it was. But it's not. Now, is there a lesson to be learned? Oh, you bet. After about the 7th or 8th time, I got it. Okay? Put the ladder where it's supposed to be put and put the chalk under the wheel, just like it says in your employee handbook. I finally got it. Okay? Wow. Duh. I need to work with the law the way the law works. Because if I try to get the law to work in a way it doesn't work, it's totally unimpressed. It could care less. You know, it's not like the law of gravity said, oh, Mr. Young is the one leaning across like this. We like Jim. We're going to suspend. All right, everybody down there, suspend the law of gravity. Sector 3. No, doesn't happen that way. You see? Gravity is impartial. So what happens to us is as we go through life and something usually unpleasant happens. And I'll tell you why I say usually in a moment. Because, I'll tell you right now, when something wonderful happens, who stops to say, ooh, I wonder why that happened. I won the lottery. I wonder why that happened. No, you're out there counting your money, trying to figure out how you're going to spend it. You never stop and think, why? But when something unpleasant happens, we go back and we say, why did that happen? Why did that happen to me? And of course, what happens? Ask and you shall receive, and we get our little answer back sometimes, most of the time. Sometimes we don't. And we say, aha, there was a lesson there, and God sent that to me to teach me a lesson. And I need you to get over that quickly, because God doesn't know that you need to know anything. Doesn't know that you're deficient in any way, shape, or form. It has given you the law to respond to you exactly according to your beliefs, and when it does, which is all the time. See? Because what we are tending to do is we are tending to project into the law something that it cannot do. Decide for us. It cannot decide for us. I'll give you another example, maybe to make it clear. Suppose you went home and you pulled a glass out of your cupboard and you got a bottle of whiskey. And you poured the bottle of whiskey into the glass and you said, okay, I will drink this whiskey unless Spirit decides that milk would be better for me, in which case the whiskey will turn to milk and I'll be okay. What do you think is going to happen? It's still going to be whiskey when you're done, right? Spirit doesn't decide what's in your best interest and then do it for you. Spirit as law directly reflects your inner beliefs. Now you are a personality, see? So what happens is you project your personality into the law, and the law reflects back to you exactly according to what you projected into it, so it looks like a person was doing it. You see? You got that? If you look in the mirror, what looks back at you? It looks like a person, doesn't it? Why? Because there's a person looking into the mirror. It's just that simple. I wanted to read to you the definition of treatment. Maybe I should explain why we use the word treatment. When we move from one culture to another, sometimes we try to use the old words of the old culture, and everybody thinks, well, I understand what that means. I understand that. And they don't have a clue, because they're understanding it in the old way. So sometimes what you have to have is new ways and new words and new means to describe things so that people get it. Now, how many people have heard the word prayer? Everybody. How many people know what prayer is? Everybody. How many people have the same idea of what prayer is? Nobody. Okay? It's like God. You talk about God to 1,000 people, there's 1,200 different opinions. So we use the word treatment instead of prayer, and we use it deliberately because people will stop and say, what does that mean? I've never heard that word before. What does that mean? Is that prayer? Maybe, maybe not. Prayer can be treatment, but it's not always. And here's the difference. Prayer, as we have learned it, is usually an asking, a begging, a pleading, a beseeching, a trying to coerce God to do something that is not in God's nature. We believe that God somehow made us sick, and now if we complain about it hard enough, God is going to somehow make us well. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Why did you do it to me in the first place? To teach you a lesson. See? Treatment. Treatment is the art, the act, and the science of consciously inducing thought within universal subjectivity for the purpose of demonstrating that we are surrounded by a creative medium which responds to us through a law of correspondence. In its more simple meaning, treatment is the time, the process, and the method necessary to the changing of our thought. Treatment is clearing the thought of negation, of doubt, and of fear, and of causing it to perceive the ever-presence of God. All right. We are surrounded by a creative medium that responds to us exactly according to our belief. That is the law. Gravity is the law that surrounds us, that responds to us exactly according to our body's mass and the distance from the other body's mass. There is a law of mind that responds to us exactly according to our belief, and it doesn't teach us anything unless we decide that we needed to learn it. We decided that there's a lesson there for us to learn. Now here is the issue I want to bring up. Number one, if you think that God is deciding on your behalf for you, you are delaying your growth. Because God cannot decide for you what it created you to decide for yourself. And what we tend to do is to say, I won't decide because Spirit knows better than I what I need and what I want. And Spirit's going to work things out for me, so I don't need to take any action here. Wrong. Wrong. You were created to decide. You were given free will. You were given responsibility. You must decide. Now what happens if you choose not to decide? You have decided not to decide. You have made a decision. And then what happens? The law acts on your inner beliefs. The things that you believe and you don't even know that you believe. Right? You understand that? There's things that you know and you know them. And there's things that you know and you don't know you know them. Subliminal, subconscious, subject call, whatever you want. Right? Keith's into hypnotherapy and he understands. There's a process by which you can help people come into an awareness of those things. But whether you're aware of it or not doesn't matter to the law. If I had never read the book that said, put the ladder directly underneath and put a chalk under the wheel, if I had never read that, gravity would still function and take me right off the ladder. Okay? So, we do not want to get to the point where we think that Spirit is deciding for us because Spirit cannot decide. We cannot abdicate that responsibility or we will delay our growth. It will look like Spirit's deciding for us because it is reflecting back to us exactly what we believe at our inner level. And when it comes back to us, we'll say, my God, that's familiar. I like that. Spirit must know what I need. Now, it reflected right back to you what you put into the law. The second thing is this. If we would stop at the beginning of every day and just simply ask ourselves, what is it for me to learn today? What is it for me to become aware of today that I wasn't aware of yesterday? How can I know thee more dearly today? We would get our lessons without the whack on the side of the head. Okay? The problem is that when things are going great, we never stop to ask what's going on. I love on the History Channel they have shows about fighter pilots where they recreate the dogfights. And I told you I was a pilot, so I love things about flying airplanes. And there was one there where the pilot was talking about, I think it was either Vietnam or Korea, but the pilot was way over enemy territory and had to make it out over the sea in order to get back to safety. And the back of the plane was on fire. The engine was on fire. And they didn't want to bail out because they would have been taken prisoner. So the pilot and the weapons officer in the back decided they were going to ride it as long as they could and see what happened. So the back of the plane went on fire, and the plane rolled over upside down. But it was still going forward. And the pilot said he did a prayer. Now, I don't know why we think that God's going to help us in war, but we do. So he did a prayer. He said, oh, God, just let me get out of this one. And the plane rolled over right side up. And he said, darn it, Gene, you are the best fighter pilot in the whole world. And the plane rolled right upside down again. He said, okay, God, I can't do this without your help. And the plane rolled over again, see? And we tend to do this. When things are going our way, we think, it's me. Right? It's all about me. I'm good. And when things are not going so well, we start to ask, what is there for me to learn? Ask yourself every day, what is there for me to learn? Ask yourself when things are going good, how can I learn? How can I grow? How can I experience more of God today? Because that's what it's all about. See? Then we will get our lessons without the pain and suffering that go with them. Of course, you have to give up drama. You know, it's a lot more interesting to tell somebody, let me tell you what I learned when that ladder came out from under me. Instead of saying, hey, I read a book and it says, put the ladder where it's supposed to go and put the chocolate under the wheel. Not nearly as good a story, is it? So you have to give up the drama if you're going to grow. So, the law as a schoolmaster is superstition. It is a fallacy. You can learn because of the things that happen to you when you interact with the law, but you learn because you asked to learn. And the law then responds to your request to know. And then you learn. See? The other thing is the law is a taskmaster. The law is punishing me, right? Now, if you were a little kid learning how to walk, and you were intellectual, and you had brothers and sisters, and you fell down, and your brother said to you, that's because you took my crayons. Right? God got you for that because you took my crayons. That's because you're not good enough. That's because you're not smart enough. That's because you're not pretty enough. All of these different things that we learn growing up that are just absolutely not true. See, we take them in and we think, oh my goodness, the law is punishing me. Now, I can go steal $20. And on the way home, I can have something of $20 value break on my car, you see? And I can say to myself, oh, God got me for that. God got me for taking that $20. Oh my goodness. No such thing. No such thing. Why did I steal the $20? I had a consciousness of lack. I had a consciousness of limitation. I had a consciousness that said the only way my good is going to come to me is if I take it from another. So I stole. Well, when I have a consciousness of lack, and I have a consciousness of limitation, and I have a consciousness that things are going to be taken, what happens to me? Things get taken from me. You see? That's all. A perfect outpicturing of the law. That's all there was. There was no punishment involved. There was no judgment involved. The law of gravity doesn't say to the child, I'm going to punish you. So there's no punishment. There's no guilt. There's no the law. I hear people say this all the time. I wanted to do this, but the law made me do that because that's what I needed to do. No, you did that because that was the perfect reflection of your inner beliefs. That's why you did that. We don't like to fess up to it, though. We like to think it's the perfect reflection of somebody else's inner beliefs. Right? Oh, what could I possibly have been thinking to do? No, it wasn't me. It was Reverend Maury. But the sooner we step up to the plate, so to speak, the sooner we take full accountability and responsibility for what we believe, the sooner that we realize that everything that is outpicturing in our life is a perfect reflection of what we believe, acted upon by an impartial law, then we can release and let go of the fear and the doubt and the superstition that says we are being tested. We are being strengthened. God doesn't know you're weak. Why would God strengthen you? Doesn't make sense. Right? We are being moved in a direction because, after all, Spirit has decided that's better for us. No. Spirit's not going to make that decision for you. There's a part of you that knows what's better for you. There's a part of you that believes it. There's a part of you that if you would stop and listen to it like we did this morning in the healing service, you would know. But there's no other power in the universe deciding for you. You have to do that for yourself. Okay? The analogy I use is it's like having a gym. You know, Curves is going out of business up here. Did you see that? They're closing down up there? I guess it's interesting. One time I talked to somebody who said there's one Curves for every 2 McDonald's in this country. I think there's a cause and effect relationship there, but I'm not certain. But we could, if we wanted to, we could buy all the equipment from Curves and we could put it in here and we could turn this place into a gym. And we could get people to come in and sign up, especially around New Year's. We could sell them a lifetime contract. They could agree to pay us $100 a month forever and ever and ever. But if they don't show up, right? If they don't get on the equipment, nothing's going to change. And it's the same thing with our consciousness. If we are not willing to go within and do the work that we need to do to allow our consciousness to change, nothing's going to happen. So we recognize then that the law is not a schoolmaster. The law is not a taskmaster. God is not trying to strengthen us. It has given us the ability to awaken to the fact that there's something in the universe that responds to us, according to our belief, and then what we learn how to do is to work with it, to cooperate with it. Then it becomes, as Ernest Holmes says, your obedient servant. You recognize then, for example, gravity was doing exactly what I asked it to do when it knocked me off of that ladder. You see? It's my obedient servant. Now, the problem we have there is sometimes we come into this and we say, oh, it's a servant. I can just boss it around. I can just tell it what it's going to do. And we do that. That's part of growing. But what we tend to realize then after that is, well, it's true, it's going to reflect back to us exactly according to our belief. We eventually start to ask ourselves, but why is that so? Why is that so? Now we get into the philosophical question. And we start to realize our connection to God. And we start to realize, as Ernest Holmes says in his definition of treatment, that we are treating and we are gaining an ever increased awareness of the presence of God. See? And then we recognize that what has happened is that we have moved through this awakening. We have realized that there's a power in the universe that responds to us. We have realized that we can learn how to cooperate with it to produce health and harmony and happiness and joy and peace and love and all of the good things worth having. And we learn that if we try to use it to produce things that aren't worth having, we're going to get more of things that aren't worth having. Right? Disharmony and all those sorts of things. But then we start to awaken to the fact, oh my goodness, the reason all of this works is because of this incredible relationship with God that we are, that we have. We then, rather than trying to use the power arrogantly, we surrender to it humbly. Become very, very clear and careful about what you think. Be very, very clear and careful about what you believe, because there's a power in the universe that responds to you. How? Exactly according to your belief. We understand now what it means to love your enemies, because if you hate your enemies, you're hating yourself. We understand that we don't steal because there's nobody to steal from but the one, which is ourselves. If I reach out to take $20 out of your pocket, I'm taking $20 out of my pocket. So at the level of pragmatism, I say, well, that's dumb. But at the level of the spiritual growth, I say that's unity. I start to surrender to this greater awareness of what it is. Once I understand, without fear, without doubt, without superstition, once I understand clearly that the love of God has created me out of itself as a unique starting place of creation for me to be a co-creator of life. Once I understand that, and I understand that there's a power in the universe that responds to my belief and will do with me and through me and for me everything that needs to be done, then I want to use it carefully. Then I want to use it for good. Then I want to use it to know more of God, to experience more of God. And when I reach that point in my spiritual growth, the law says, okay. Ask, and ye shall receive. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. But I can't get there as long as I think the law is a schoolmaster, deciding for me what I need to learn, or the law is a taskmaster deciding for me what I need to do. I have to recognize that the law is impartial and reflecting back to me what I believe, because then, and only then, can I take full responsibility, full accountability for my spiritual growth and stop waiting for somebody else to do it for me. Now here's your homework assignment. I know some of you are hoping I forgot about it. You remember the kid in the class, the bell would ring and the kid would raise their hand and say, "Sister, you forgot to give the class your homework assignment." You go out in the schoolyard and the kid come back in all beat up. "Oh, you fell off the swing, sister. We don't know what happened to you." Well, I didn't want anybody to get beat up, so I remembered to give you your homework assignment. CBS.com, www.cbs.com, like the TV channel, CBS. If you go to www.cbs.com and you look under videos, and then you look under classic TV, you will find the original Star Trek series. Okay. So there's the Old Testament, there's the New Testament, there's the Upanishads, right? And then there's Star Trek, the original series. And I want you to go to Season 1, Episode 15, Shore Leave. Shore Leave. I've mentioned this one before. It's 50 minutes long. There'll be a couple commercials on it. What I'm telling you to do is perfectly legal. You can watch it over your computer. Now, Shore Leave is an episode where Gene Roddenberry wrote the story. It is an episode where the crew of the Starship Enterprise, and I'm going to ask their names later. If you want a donut, you have to give me at least 20 names. This crew of the Starship Enterprise arrives on this planet they have never been to before, a previously undiscovered planet. And they are going about the planet trying to discover what's going on. And what we see that they don't see is there's these tiny little antennas that occasionally pop up from rocks and trees and kind of follow people. Some of you have seen this episode? I haven't seen it. And then they disappear. We don't know what these antennas are for or what they're doing, but we know something's going on. See, there's something going on. And what happens is the crew starts to have very unusual and disturbing experiences. Strange things happen. For Captain Kirk, his old nemesis from Starfleet Academy appears. Even though the man has supposed to have been dead, he appears and he challenges Kirk to a fist fight. And you're duking it out through this whole episode. Another, I guess it was Sulu, he gets engaged in a sword fight. And you see him through this whole thing, he's going through a sword fight. And one of the female crew members gets kidnapped by a knight, and he has her dress up in a princess costume, and she's a damsel in distress that has to be rescued. And Alice in Wonderland go by, and the big rabbit goes by, and everybody's trying to figure out what happens until somebody gets killed, and then they think, "Oh, this is terrible. This place is terrible." And with that, the people behind the antennas come out, and they make themselves known. And they say to the crew of the Enterprise, "You want me to tell you, or you just want to watch it?" They say to the crew of the Enterprise, "We just realized that you don't understand what this place is or how it works. This is a recreation planet. People come here for shore leave. We are able to detect your innermost desire, your inner beliefs. And then we arrange the circumstances on the planet. so that you get to have the one experience that you most wanted to have. So Captain Kirk says, yes, I always wanted to punch that guy in the nose. You know? Sulu says, yes, I always wanted to be a great sword fighter. The young lady says, yes, I always wanted to be the damsel in distress rescued by the great knight. And then they bring out the fellow who was apparently killed, and he's not dead at all, because they know how to make these things work. The crew then understands, all these experiences that I was having are a reflection of what I truly believe, but I didn't know what I truly believed. Now that I know, now I can go to this planet and I can choose the experience I wish to have. Yeah. How cool is that? So I invite you to go watch it. It's a good thing to do Sunday afternoon. As I say, it'll take about an hour. But you'll be able to see in graphic form a demonstration of what we are talking about. There is a power in the universe that responds to us exactly according to our belief. We didn't know how it worked, so we created all kinds of mischief and mayhem in our lives. We didn't even realize that we were the ones creating it. We thought somebody else was doing it to us. But one day we were destined to awaken to the fact that we were doing it to ourselves through this power that responds to us according to our belief. And now that we know that, you see, now that we know that, we can let go of fear, we can let go of doubt, we can let go of superstition, we can allow ourselves to become aware when there's some kind of a false belief that we outpicture, that we mention in our daily conversation. Oh yes, Spirit decided for me that I needed to have this. Oh no, it didn't. It did no such thing. Once we recognize how it works, truly life can be a holiday, a vacation, in which we use this tremendous, tremendous spiritual power that we didn't create, that we are part of for the purpose that we came, which is to open our hearts to a greater experience of the availability of the presence and the activity of God right here, right now, in this place, at this time. I love Rabbi Hillel's quote, and there's no context for it, but it's lasted since before Christ. It says, if not now, when? If not us, who? Now is the time. We are the people. Now is the time for us to awaken to the fact that there is a benevolent, kind, loving power of the universe that will let the circumstances of our life take whatever form we choose, and to use it and to cooperate with it intelligently, to allow it to use us for its purpose. We must understand how it works. And then we must work with it. It is neither a schoolmaster nor a taskmaster, but it is an impartial reflection of that which we believe. And the most beautiful part of the whole deal is that it will work with us to change our beliefs if we believe it can. A tremendous gift has been given. A tremendous gift. We have suffered under ignorance for too long. Tremendous gift has been given. We are free under the law to let God's love express through us in a manner that only we can. Let's just let go of the old junk. Let's just let go of the old fear, the old doubt, the old superstition, and recognize that there is nothing that can stand in the way of the Word of God. And that Word said, let there be people. Let there be people who can interact with this power and take life to a whole new level. Now's the time. We're the people. Let's do it. So it is. All right, let's go from the head to the heart. Let's just feel the love. God is all there is. All there is. It has created us out of itself as its instruments of love. It has created each and every person out of itself as its instruments of love. It has equipped us with the ability to choose and the responsibility to decide. It will not do for us that which it created us to do for ourselves. So we step up to that responsibility, and today we choose, and we choose wisely, a greater experience of the love and the presence of God in, as, and through us. We accept for ourselves that we have already released and let go of any old and limiting ideas, and we have allowed our consciousness to expand to the unlimited possibilities of what God as us can be and can do. We recognize that the only purpose for which we are here is to learn and to grow and to love and to stretch and to let God be God as us. And we choose the particular way or ways that will happen, and the law then cooperates with us to make it so. Except for each and every one of us, that we know burning in our heart is a desire to be more, to do more, to express life in some unique and wonderful way. And today we finally fess up and say yes. Of my own self I do nothing, but the Spirit within me as law does it all. So I surrender and I let God be God as me, and I am glad. We release this treatment to that perfect law, that law in which we are immersed, that law which responds to us according to belief. And this treatment is our belief that law changes our consciousness and changes our circumstances, and it is done. So we release it together, so certain it is done that we say together, and so it is.